Hello, how you doing? This is Joe the Music, and today I wanted to show you a mix that I was working on and completed, turned in, and show you, just give you an overview of the process. I'm not going to play too much of the music, but be sure to subscribe, leave a comment below if you find anything valuable that you learned through the process. But I'm going to just go through my process of transforming a logic session from, in this case I got it from the client, and I like starting from the logic session personally so I can be able to bounce it in the way that I like to bounce it and make sure that I have all the files. So a lot of times I have them to print everything, all the plugins and everything within logic, so I could be able to see what was there, what is needed. And I see sometimes though you got to make sure you have all the files. You got to make sure everything that's supposed to be there is there. So I'll go on in the process. So I'll get all the files. Once everything is there, I'll just go to file here and export all the tracks as audio files. And here I have it set up where it gets track number and the track name, right? In 24 bits. So once I have that, we're ready to go. So this is it was a raw session. It didn't have any reverb. It didn't have any external effects too much. But he also provided a bounce reference to what he did that I was able to use. So like far as the effects, far as reverbs and things of that nature, I will have to make it on my own. But before anything, just to give you some reference to what I am using. For one, I am using if we can show it here, I'm using this Neve 88M, and I'm gonna show you how I'm using this tool to as the summing bus. A lot of people don't realize that if you could send out ADAT, you could create a summing bus with your interface, especially as interfaces have a lot, or they're adding like the preamps to the interfaces. You might as well take advantage of those preamps, right? The way I went about this one, I'm using, as I showed you that, but I'm also using a tool from Behringer, which is how I'm able to get how I was able to get the routing to go back in. Like you have to have an ADAT to send out and have it to have something to bring back the audio, so it's not within one device. Can be costly. And the case of what I'm using, once I could get this here, give me a second. I want to show you the actual what I'm talking about. So yeah, using this ADA 8200 Behringer, and this device has multiple channels, and it has an ADAT. The ADAT that goes out of the Neve, I'll bring it into the ins on here, then the outs on here. Then now, of course, I have it set up where all the lines are lined up, and I have it where I could send tracks to any of these channels. Once I have a send the out channel to one of these channels, from the ADAT, it sends it out from Pro Tools to the one of the ins on here, and then that out will go back into the Neve. Okay, so let me load up the session, and you're getting the raw. Okay, so now we have the session. Let me change the screen here a little bit so we could see, so you could see what I'm seeing. And bam. Okay, now you see the session here. So the session, it opened with the Melodyne open, but now as when I bounced all the files, just so you can see, they are all numbered. You see I have from 0, 1, then the kick, the name of the track. So this is all done with inside of Logic so I can organize the files. So I'll insert the files, which is Command Shift I, find the files, and then I'll just add them. This template, I have a template set up where there's nothing but like the effects and how I want to route the audio through the interfaces. So I don't have to set that up when I start. But one thing I have to set up once the files are in the session is routing them to the proper location. But a lot of times before I even go through that process, I'll just balance out the audio. Like I'll find the levels, make sure all the levels are straight, and just listen to what's there. Making sure that everything is balanced as it was balanced within the Logic session, because a lot of times the producer kind of balance it. See if there's anything that's popping out, and then I'll go in there and trim it. As you can see here, I have some of the trims. Let me see if you can see it. You can see here, I'll trim the audio. Everything balances. Then I'll go in there, go further, and eventually just start tuning and taking out all the artifacts. So as you can see here, I'll further go into the tuning process. Of course, I found the key first, which in this case is B minor, and then I'll go in there and tune it to B minor. There's processes on how to find the B minor and the keys, but I'll eventually have a course for that. But let me know if you want to know more about finding the key of a song, because there's a few processes and few strategies you could go about doing that. But once you have the key of the song and you have the tempo, it's time to just clean up the audio. So as you can see here, I tuned up a lot of the vocals. Once I cleared everything out, took out artifacts, and make sure there's nothing that's standing out, I will start routing the audio. So I like to start with the instruments. So the very first thing I'll do is route all the drums to the drum bus, which you can see up here. Let me see if I have some memory locations, I believe. There's no effects. Okay, so you can see I have all the drums, all the music, and everything is within that space. It's not really color coded, as you can see. I normally color code it, but I was just in the process of rushing through it, and if it was in a class, I'd probably missing points. But it's best to color code it so we can have a visual representation of the audio files. Okay, once I have that in the balance and it sounds pretty decent, if I was just to play it with no effects, that's when I'll start making decisions. So the very first thing I like to do is go with the drums, because they're typically the loudest instruments in the music. In this case, it's a different type of song. It's not necessarily a R&B. It's not it's pop. If you think of it, it's more of like a James Blake type of song, right? First thing I'll do, I'll listen to it, because a lot of times within the printing of the track, the producer has already made decisions on the EQing and the compression. But I'll go ahead and listen, and a lot of times you like to go with the Leslie Barthwaite's philosophy of minimalization, not doing too much, keeping what works to work. What doesn't, try to fix it with little effort, not too many plugins. Sometimes though, I blend that philosophy with Jason Joshua, which is he's more very detailed, and it gets very complicated bus structures and sound staging and gain staging and different things like that, which I take advantage of that too. As you can see in this session, it's like it has the best of both worlds. I also use some of Andrew Shelp's process, which I have different ways of having the levels, managing how the buses are going for certain elements, like such as the toms or the vocals. Yeah, sometimes I'll go as far as having, as you see here, I'll use I'll use various memory locations, and even I don't see it here for whatever reason what I was trying to look for. Just using the tools that are makes it easier to manage the levels of the sounds. But once I have that set up, I'll go in here, go to each instrument and listen to it. I don't like to go into mono too much, but I'll to solo. But I like to listen to everything in the context. But eventually, I solo out like elements, like the rhythm section. In this case, is like I use the drums, and I want all of those drums to work with each other. So in this case, I started off using. I don't normally use Soft 2, but since it was given to me, I have the bundle now, which is pretty exciting. I wanted to use some of their tools. So I use this emulation, which I believe this is another Neve, if I'm not mistaken. Neve in the building. But as you can see, I have some gain as far as the drive. I added some low end to make the drums a little more beefier, and I added some more attack to the drums. And then we also have some compression, a little bit of compression. This, where is it at? Yeah, you can see it. This little bit of compression here, and that just sounded great. You know what I mean? And I was like, okay, that's it. Once I had the drums, the kick drum, of course, I try to work with the bass relationship to the kick drum. So I went into the bass, and I said I wasn't going to use this plugin in this session, but it's always somehow I end up using it. But this is one of my favorite SSL plugins of all time. It's better than any other SSL plugin that I have, and I have a lot of them. And but anyways, I just added a little high end to the bass because it's electronic bass. It only appears on the hook, but I wanted to jump out a little bit. And you see I have a little bit of compression on here to control how wobbly it was. And then I threw it into, you'll see this a lot through this session. I have desaturation plugins with this standard clip. It's pretty great. It was introduced to me by another producer. And again, using the basics, I didn't go into, there's different vibes that you could get from these different settings, but I just stuck with the classic. It doesn't have the logarithm where when you move it up and things of that nature. It's just very basic, but I have it at 18, and it controlled how the bass of the peaks, tamed them, and it added more weight to the bass. Then I added additional weight with this R bass, and it came under. I brought up like the subs a lot more because it didn't have too many subs within that bass sound. All of this is routed to, like I mentioned, it goes into the bus. We have a drum bus, which right now it has a trick that I learned from Dr. Dre. When I learned Dr. Dre likes to push the drums into the Studer 800, I had to get this. And again, I got this on sale. I take advantage of every sale, and especially around pandemic time, I stacked up. But anyways, you got that, and then that is how all those drums are going into that. But I have a dedicated bass bus where it's almost emulating it going through like a mixer or a board of this Helios. And as you see, I brought it down, but I put up a lot of gain on the low end, and it just brought this texture that was just beautiful and that I liked. It was very aggressive, but I turned it down, and it just made it sound like fuller, and it gave this vibe that was pretty cool. Once I had that, I had snares. The snares, As you can see, took out some of the resonance, took up the highs, brought up some of the mids, and this goes into a reverb. Let me see if we have the reverb open. I have a snare reverb, as you can see here. It gates out. It first gates the snare a little bit, so it's only capturing like the peaks of that snare. So it's not capturing the whole the roundness of it. It's just like some of the peaks, and that's fed into the R vibe, into an ambience of it. And of course, you have shelved the EQ, so it's bringing more of the beefiness of that sound of this reverb, and getting rid of all the high frequency ranges. Let's see, let's bring it. All these drums, like I said, they all routed into the drums. Like you see, they only show up on the hook. Before that, it's just we have a percussive loops. I controlled those first. I had to, as I mentioned before, it's gonna have a lot of saturation. Use the saturation. I see there's some percussion on the hook as well. Did a shelf EQ. Took all the lows and the mids. I just wanted the high frequency, and in combination with the saturation, it just made it fit in the mix a lot better, and it wasn't clashing with the lower end frequencies that are introduced on that part. So as you can see on the loop, I didn't have any other effects. I didn't go have it sending to any reverbs or anything like that. I just kept it dry. And pretty much for a lot of the percussion, I believe I kept everything pretty dry on this mix. See here on the second drum loop, I brought down the level a little bit, and it goes right into the transformer emulation. And then I took out some resonance and then I added some low end, as you can see here, using the Pro Q. I don't normally use Pro Q, but I saw another video recently. I was like, okay, let me start using the Pro Q for this mix. Sometimes I have so many other EQ choices. It just depends on the vibe. But here, and this one is more electronic. I wanted to have everything very straight to the point. Not too much reverb, just reverb that's very specific in its use case. Now, the strings was actual strings. It sounded like it was a patch where it had sound like an orchestra. It's pretty dry. I tested out the levels and it was like, okay, let's bring it down. And then once I added this plugin here, again, another soft tube, which is emulating like the chamber sound of a studio of Atlantis. I wanted to sound like it's in a big studio where these string players are all playing together. So I started messing around with the type of microphones. Came to this conclusion here. As you can see, I have a original delay. I brought the microphones a little closer because it was a little further at first, and then there's no pre-delay. But this brought this magic to the sound. It just made it sound like it's in a big place and has filled up the room, but it's very controlled. So after this is not the right one. After I had it go into that, I brought in the SSL to bring out more of the highs and bring in more of the mid range and the low range. It's more of the mid range, as you can see in the lower mids, because I wanted to have more body to those string sounds. So almost like you're playing, I believe, like the cellos, the lower string instruments, and it just brought this depth to the sound. So you always want to have the image in your mind of what you're going for, because in my mind I wanted it to take up the space but not take up the center too much. So that's why I brought down the center frequencies, as you can see here. Brought them down, and for all of them, from everything from the highs and the lows, and just allowed the side to be there, because I wanted the vocal to find its own home, but it meshes together. There's no sends. The only space is from that one Atlantis chamber sound. And the choir, we have use another soft tube plugin, which is pretty great. I like this one too. I think I'm gonna start using it more. Again, it emulates various types of transformers and various types of saturation and harmonics from these different tones. And I found a good tone from this transformer. It's kept some of the settings were just as defaulted. I just worked with the, yeah, I didn't change much. I just kept it for what it was because it just sounded great. Then I threw that into a compressor and I did some very aggressive compression because I wanted that sound to just sit in one place in the speaker. So I pushed the gain. So I saw the gain reduction hit around, I believe it was around, let's see if we could play it. No, I don't want to play it. But I had a hit pretty hard, and then I brought the overall output gain down. It had a fast attack, but what it does, it sat right in the center, and the harmonics and everything, it was right there. And then once I had it in the center, I wanted it to move a little bit, as you can see with this Sound Toys. I could have done it with automation, but Sound Toys just made it easier for me to just get it done. And when it plays, it just has this ghostly effect. When it's in a center like that and it's just moving, you can just clearly hear it, but it's not distracting. It's not in the way of any other sound. Now we're getting into one of my favorite areas, right? Hide this, which are the vocals, right? Now the vocals, they all, like all the other channels, they all go into a bus, a dedicated bus. As you can see here, it got all of the vocals going into this bus. And what did I do on this bus here? I had an aggressive de-esser. I used a preset and then just dialed it in. You're gonna see that I have multiple de-essers, but this was like the final one to capture any gains that just jumped out in that frequency. And this L1 is doing a lot. Actually, it looks like it's doing very little, but it's doing so much because what it does on this final channel, I'll show you how within the buses how I'm using L1s and different limiters. But in this one, like, it's a trick that I learned from Dave Pensado. It's like the ladder effect of limiters, because like each limiter you could bring up the gain a little bit and then stop it, and it just makes it so it could get very loud and have its own location on the speaker, but it could be too loud. So in this case, I had to adjust it. Like, that was one of the requests from the producers, like getting the level, the overall volume of the vocals to sit in a certain place in the mix. And this is what this L1 is doing here. It just sits. See, I have it as at a -1 right now, and it's just sitting in its own place. And you can see I have other ones in there too. Like I said, this is more when I get into my Jason Joshua side of the mixing, where it's like a lot of buses and a lot of different controls. Even though I didn't separate the bass, in different channels and frequencies in this particular mix, because there were so many other elements. If it was like a hip hop mix where it's like the drum is the main component, that's when I go into separating the frequencies of the 808s and things of that nature. But this didn't have that. So it was like more of this controlling the dynamics of the sounds. So in the vocals though, like, to get back to this, my favorite parts, I bust a lot of the vocals in different places. They all run into different purposes. So we'll start off with these some background vocals that I had, that the producer had, the artist had in the beginning of the verse, that I call them like the ins and outs. show up on the parts that are quiet in the leads. And as you can see here, I have them all bust through this V1BGVS. What is that? Let's look at it. That is going into this channel here. So this channel ended up going to the all Vox, and you can see why that de-esser is there at the end, because I didn't use it here on this particular bus. But you can see I brought the highs of 10K, which I liked how this sounded. This is another soft tube EQ, but it just had this magic, that this sparkle that was just special, and you just felt it right away. And I used my one of my favorite built-in EQs. It just does what it's supposed to do. Cut off some of the mids, and it doesn't have any saturation or anything. It's just very clean. Then I added saturation, right? So pretty much what I did: surgical EQ, added some frequency EQs, like where it's like some saucy. Then I surgically removed some stuff. Then I brought it into the shelves. I added saturation. There is also, I don't have the de-esser going on this one, but I have some more EQing, which I just took out some of the mids and the lows. Then I put it on the Opto compressor, which the Opto is similar to like a LA2A, right? So I use that to control like some of the peaks and to have it sound smooth. So that's what I did. And of course, there's a lot of other effects that's involved with this, but we'll go into more of the effects once I go to the lead vocals and show you how they all play together. So we'll go back to the lead. Now, I have a dedicated lead bus. Now, I told you about using Andrew Shelp's method. This is pretty much what he'll do. He'll have the leads going into a specialized bus for the leads, because that is another important part of the song, having the lead vocals to sit in the place. So a lot of work is done on making that vocal to sit, not too loud, not too low, but being able to hear every vocal nuance, from the subtle whispers to the loud impulse. I want to be able to control that and keep that in the center range of the speaker. And that makes it so I'm making the artist shine. I want the artist to tell the story in front of your face instead of it behind. And even if reverb is there, it's just like you're always in my face. And that's one of the things I wanted to convey with this mix. So of course I use my favorite. Like I said, I go into the bit clipper, or you could call it the saturation. I use a little of the saturation, and then I went into, it looks like the emulation of the API, if I'm not mistaken, from Plugin Alliance. Another one I took advantage of. I don't even like getting the subscription model. I just wait until the sales are there, right? And we're using the VCA compressor on this one, as you can see here. So I have it compressed a little bit. And then we have 4.1, pretty fast release. And then we have added some more high end in 20 frequency range. Because something happens when you throw that in there. I believe the artist recorded on a Manly, so it's a very warm mic. And the tones that are from the vocals are more in the mid range and the warmer range. So I wanted to have this sparkle a little bit. And I control that sparkle, I'll show you later on, with various de-essers, right? So it doesn't kill your ears. You know. So yeah, I took out some of the mids, and yeah, this is a great sounding every plugin is great sounding nowadays. It's like hard to even make a decision. It's just, as long as you understand what you're looking for, you can test them out and you start finding magical points. But you definitely want to have your gain staging together. You don't want to have it peaking too loud. Try to keep it around negative 6 dB if you're going to record your vocals, and keep it up around negative 18, around that range as far as the lowest volume. And you could uh, essentially use any of these plugins, and you'll get the best quality from those plugins. So as I mentioned, I use this as the de-esser in this particular track. So since I had the added all those highs, I wanted to go in here, and as you can see, I also have the mix a little lower, so it's almost a parallel of a de-esser. But I like this refinement because it's very simple, but it gives you a lot of ways of dynamically controlling these harsh frequencies. And as you can see here, I'm actually using the dynamic range. I have it heavy. It's almost to 100%, right? It's like negative D. What is that? Negative 13 dB of reduction for that range. I have a little bit of saturation, and I took out some of the presence because I added presence with the EQ, right? And then we just played around with the mix to get the balance. I didn't want it to have it too much, but I didn't want too little. So as you can see, I'm the best of both worlds. It's heavily taking out those parts, but at the same time keeping a lot of the original sharp highs in the frequency. It made it sit in the speaker, and you could feel the vocals a different way, right? Once I have that, they all end up going into this bus here, which is, like I said, it's inspired by Andrew Shelps. As you can see here, this is muted. This Poltech one, just to show you a little bit about what's happening here. I didn't change this plugin, doesn't have the change. But all it's doing, and it's low here, it's bringing more highs. It's like for the higher frequency range of the vocals. But instead of doing it on an individual channel, like how Andrew has it, I have to replace this. I have the other Poltex. But you can see it, what it's doing. It's like boosting a lot of the AK and attenuating the lows before it hits the compressor, where he brought up the compressor of it, and then brought the lows back in and took some of the highs out. So you bring in some extra like sauciness to that range, and you're able to blend it. But I didn't use it. I just used the lead channel, and I added a lead bus, I should say. I added like this Arteria high-end emulation of, again, and must be getting tired. The Neve, right? So you have some of the highs, cut out some of the lows. I changed the transformer. Of course, I like transformer distortion, so I like to find the distortion points that I like, then I add additional distortion, transformer distortion. And these little increments of distortion, it just makes it sound so fluffy and so warm. And then eventually I'll go into the RVox. RVox is a pretty powerful tool if you haven't been using it. It's an old school Waves plugin, but it just does what you want it to do with these vocals. I think I learned it from Marcella, another engineer. She uses the RVox a lot on her vocals, and that's where I got it. And I was like, okay, that makes sense how it works. And I see a lot of other engineers use it too. So I throw that, and then I have a L2. You see this? We're using the L2 limiter, and just catching the peaks. It's not really doing too much gain, but that little bit of gain that is there in the threshold, it makes a lot of difference. As I showed you on the other bus where it's -1, it changed from it being in front of the mix to in between the mix or behind the mix. Just those little small increments of sound. And I believe I have some sins on here. Let me see if we can open it up. It looks like I didn't add any on this channel. That's interesting. I didn't add any reverb to that channel. Wow, I didn't know I did that. Okay, so let's open up. Let's make sure we didn't do that. So we have all the channels now in the session, and you know what? I did add it. So after it goes into this channel, I go into the vocal combination channel, lead combination. So all the leads end up going to this last channel here, right? And this channel ends up going to the other bus, right? So in this channel here, as you can see, I have another de-esser to capture some of the highs, and another L1, L2 to capture more of the peaks. But in addition to that, I have EQs. I have an exciter. Show you what the exciter is doing. So you have a little. I'm using this vintage exciter, and again, it's playing with the higher frequency tones. And when you play with these tones, you'll find a place where it'll bring images in your mind. You get more colors, and it brings more feeling out. But it's always about being very nuanced with your decision. Here it's pretty heavy. You can see I used it quite a bit. Actually, it doesn't look like I used it. I used it. See what this is, and we have vocal verb. Yeah, it looks like I didn't use the apex too much on this mix because I noticed the channel wasn't there. I didn't add it. That's a nice little accident that I did. So what? Yeah, we ran here's the vocal verb. I have it going here. As you see, I chopped off the highs and the lows, and I have it going through the studio verb. I like this reverb. Again, another plugin that I noticed Dave using on a mix, and he brought it up, and I started using this. It sounds pretty cool for vocals. You notice I have like different types of reverbs. They all serve different purposes, and they all have various tones. This room reverb just made it, again, it puts the vocal within the space. It was clean. These eventide reverbs is very clean, and it gave me what I was looking for. I was trying different reverbs, and that's one of the one I came up with. As you can see, I have some other channels. I kept them just muted. I didn't really need it. Like everything else was I wanted to have it clean and pretty straight to the point. I didn't want it. I didn't want to add too much. There are use cases of using those other plugins. Like if it was like more of if there was guitars and there's certain other type of instruments, it sounds cool when you have a slap delay, or it'll have like certain spreading of the vocals in certain ways. But this, it was just more of, since there were so many elements of the backgrounds that were bringing the context of the space, it wasn't too necessary on this particular mix. And as you can see, even in the pre-hook, I have a channel, another group. What is this doing? So this group here is going to the O's group. In the O's group, which is what it is, what I have it. Okay, I got another helium. This time I'm adding some highs. I brought it down. Look how low I brought it. And the reason I brought it down so low is because I'm using the mic instead of the line input. Now the mic input is something that I eventually caught on to what is happening here. It's just using the transformers differently from a line input. Like the line is like a unity gain. The mic has a different type of gain structure. Of course, it's going to be a little bit louder. There may be some distortion. So once you turn it down and then you add, as you see here, I have a little EQ. It just made it sound saucy when I put it on the O's. Then eventually I took out some of the lows, found a resonant frequency that was bothering me using the built-in EQ. Spread it out. As you can see, here's another trick that I had to learn. The mid side and the L and R. they make a huge difference on what is being sent through the spreader. So if you're using it left and right, you're not going to have the same type of like control of the sides like if you're using the mid side. So I did that, added this, and it just put the vocals, spreaded them out further while keeping the mids like lower. Then we threw it into an Arteria, the VCA 65, and as you can see, I have a little bit of compression on it, but again, it's just to control how those O's are sounding on the left and right speaker. I wanted them both to be controlled on the left and right speaker. All right, so as you can see, everything ends up going into these buses that I mentioned. I didn't really go into some of these sins that I have. I think I showed you a couple of them, but yeah, I want to show you now. I don't think I mentioned it, but I do use the reference of the 2-track that was sent to me, and also I turn on Apple Music or Spotify and listen to various songs, and I have different ways of playing back the sound. In this case, I use various studio emulation plugins. As you can see here, I got the Sound ID so I can emulate my speakers. So I have a flat response that goes into studio emulation. And having these options, this is the reason why I use this one, because I have the different speakers I can listen to. And I'll listen to this as I go through the mix to compete, see if I can beat it a little bit better, make sure I can get the levels louder, have more percussion, and that sort. But I was going to mention all of the sounds end up going to these buses. So all the vocals in this case ends up, like I'm talking about when I say all the vocals, including the leads, the O's, and all those sounds that I showed you, is going to end up in this bus. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to add another de-esser, just to control some of the high frequencies that I didn't control earlier on. Then, as I mentioned, this limiter to control the overall volume and how it fits within the mix. So this is true for all of the channels. There's different types of tools on there. As you see, it's not too much. I didn't use too much this time. I didn't really have to, because everything was there. It's just adding a little more sauciness to the sauce, right? And once that is done, and I go and use the trick that I told you. I think I mentioned it, where I'll export everything. First, it goes to the print, this channel here. Now I bring it out from the ADAT, from the Neve, and it goes into the Behringer channel of the 7 and 8. And then I got that 7 and 8 chained to 1 and 2. So I have a physical wire that goes from this channel 7 and 8 that's connected to the inputs of the 1 and 2 of the Neve interface. So now pretty much what that is, I've created a summing bus using this beautiful Neve device. You could do this on other interfaces, but you want to make sure that it has transformers in your interface to do it. Even the ADA has various transformers. Even if you just had that alone, you could do the same process and get that analog sound. You literally turned your digital into an analog. You transferred the digital to audio, to analog, and then you brought it back into digital. So that's what I did here. But before it even goes out to the ADAT, I have a few plugins on this master. So for one, I have the black box, which, as you can see, is very limited. I have a little bit of the mix involved, but it has the highs and it has some of the saturations on the low. But it just brought this extra layer of protection to the peaks, as well as it widens and makes the sound a little more beefier. Then I go into another transformer, another layer of like distortion. Absolutely crazy, right? It sounds crazy, but it gives it a little bit more gain. I'm not using any of the compressors. As you can see, there's no compression. It has a little bit of the gain, but it's using this transformer. Again, it's a trick from Jason Joshua, where in this case I had it in the mid section, it looks like. So it's capturing the mid. It's like a mid range of the transformers. It's almost like a throttle where you go up and down, up higher frequencies, lower frequencies, the mid frequencies, right? And that makes a difference to the overall mix and tone of the mix. Then I go into, this is used, shout out to Stan. He's an engineer who developed this plugin with his partners, the master plan. I use this only if I'm going to show the client a mix and comparing it to other mixes. This thing, it gets the mix loud without distorted, without like clamping down on the dynamics. It just makes it louder. So I brought it up to the standards of what the -14 range, so this sounds good if it was compared to other sounds. I didn't add anything else. As you can see, it's just using the loudness on this plugin. But there's a lot of features that you could look at. You even have a monitoring section. But as you can see, I already have a monitoring section built into the session. So this, the only thing I use is here. Sometimes I use the widener or EQs, but in this case I didn't have to do it. Then I have another DA converter. Sometimes I use, it depends on what I want to use. I'll throw it into this analog matrix, axis analog rather. It's, yeah, goes into the axis analog. Let me see if we can, I'll show you exactly the one that I use, what I like to use. So it sometimes it'll be this one, or it just depends on what I want to use. I had more credits, I will use like the Bus Plus. Depends on how crazy I want to go. I don't own the Bus Plus like some of the engineers that I've seen. I may eventually get it. I may get some more of these AD converters, but I use this Focus one because I trust Focusrite's conversions. I like how it sounded, so I used it. And again, I love saturation. As you can see, it just little bits of saturation everywhere. It's like if you had a canvas of a photography or pictures, like those little bits and pixels. The more pixels that you have, the higher resolution of the photo. So these little pixels that I'm sparkling all over the audio mix is just making it so everything sounds cohesive, and it sounds louder, and it sounds smooth, and it brings this pristine like low end and high end frequencies. It's like calms things down, but it keeps it into place. So that's why I like to use these different saturations. Then after that, I go into the master. Right, this is where I actually print the audio. I like to print it. This is an old school way of thinking about it. I learned this from some OG engineers because I like to hear what's being bounced as it's being bounced. As you can see here, I will see this. I'm like, okay, something sounded funny. Let me rebounce it. But at the same time, I could hear it being played back through the same playback. I could switch from the different speakers. I could look at the VU meters to see if something has peaked, all while it's bouncing out. I really like doing this. I'll change the bit rate of the sound using these codecs. In this case, I have it on the YouTube low quality. The mobile, you see how it's like mobile low quality. because that's how people's gonna listen to it. Sometimes they'll turn it on a YouTube channel, and it'll be very low internet range, or their phone is not set to have high resolution because they want to save their data plan, right? So I'll listen to it here. I'll actually make decisions. Sometimes I'll start the mix on this low frequency so I can just hear how crumbly and how bad things are and see if things jumping out. And this helps me to make decisions. And also you can see the LUFs and other components while it's being played back. And of course, after that, you just do your Shift Command K. You can bounce it out to wherever you want to place it. And that's how I can save these files. And that's why I'll have multiple versions within the session itself. So like in this case, I have the master version, as you can see, is a little louder. And I have the one for master. In this case, on this song here, the artist is going to use this on it's going to get it mastered. So yeah, that is the overview of how I mix, how I think about the mixing process, and how I ensure that I give the highest quality to the client. So I wanted to share that with you. Of course, you can reach out to me if you need a mix, if you need something mixed, or if you have any questions or anything like that. Just feel free to comment below, subscribe. I'm gonna have some other videos. Of course, I have my own music as well that you can check out. And yeah, thank you for looking at this channel. Hopefully you found some valuable information. Have a good day.